So there's a common belief that in order to overcome addiction, you either have to somehow retrain or change the thoughts and beliefs that you have in your mind, which are so automatic, or unpack and unpick and sift through all the emotions of the past, particularly traumatic emotional states that may be unresolved. Both of these approaches kind of leave you feeling like it's an endless task, like it would take so long, and where would you even start? So in this video, I want to break down these two approaches and then contrast that with the TruQuit consciousness-based recovery, which I think actually provides a real solution to both of those methods. So let's talk first about the idea of unpacking your emotional past. And this is often the case with therapies like psychodynamic therapy, psychoanalysis, attachment-based theory, inner child work, schema work, and even narrative-based trauma therapies. So the core assumptions here is that the current behavior that is driven by unconscious patterns that have formed in the past, and particularly addictive behavior, that addiction maybe once served a purpose of soothing or protecting or regulating when there was a traumatic circumstance. But then the insight and emotional processing reduce the grips of these patterns. That's the idea, that having insight into the past, into unpacking how did this emotional state arise, where the addiction came in, having that insight would then lead to being able to control and change these behaviors. So healing comes through understanding where the behavior came from. So it's really much looking at the past. So this is how a lot of these, what I would call depth-oriented therapies work. And this is why some people think it would just take so long because, well, for example, I did the Jungian psychoanalysis, which is a depth therapy, and particularly it's a dream analysis is what I did for 8 years, every week for 8 years. And I can say that, yes, it did seem endless. I was really into it, but I can see why people would say, well, I want to quit my addiction now. I don't want to go through years of unpacking while the rest of my life's falling apart. So in terms of addiction, these therapies are framed in that the addiction is viewed as an adaptive strategy rather than a flaw, rather than a bad choice, say. And cravings are linked to unmet needs or attachment wounds or trauma that occurred in the past. So progress with this type of depth-oriented therapy involves revisiting these emotions, revisiting these memories, and kind of relating to the history of how this occurred. So the strengths with this type of approach would be, it builds up a deep self-understanding of what happened, and you develop a deep compassion for yourself, and even understand that happened in the past and why it happened. And you can maybe stop blaming yourself and things like that. So it reduces shame by restoring the context of how this addictive behavior came into being in relation to these past events. So it can be valuable and particularly for complex trauma. The limitations of this depth-oriented therapy is that it can feel very open-ended and never complete. It doesn't always lead to embodied change, because even though you might understand where it all came from, it doesn't necessarily immediately translate over into change in your present day life. And of course, we want change with our addiction yesterday, pretty much, don't we? So it's more of a conceptual change without an experiential change. No, not always, but it very much lead to that. So it often seems as if there's always more to understand, and you can kind of get into this tunnel vision and this belief that if you want to fix something in the present, you've got to keep going back and understanding and unpacking it. It keeps you really locked into your conceptual mind. So, this type of therapy, and I've experienced the benefits of it, but for immediate addiction recovery, it does have some significant limitations. So let's now look at the other seeming roadblock, the idea that your addiction is based on certain thoughts and beliefs, and that's causing you to make bad choices and choose addiction and not be able to stop the influence of those thoughts and beliefs in your daily life. So I'm going to really focus on CBT therapy here because that's a very prominent, very common, popular, evidence-based approach, which really does embody all the elements of this type of therapy. So the idea is that rather than where did this behavior come from, CBT would say, what are you thinking right now? How is that thought influencing your behavior right now? So it's very much looking at the thinking process, the cognitive process, hence the name cognitive behavioral therapy. So the core orientation of this is that addiction is maintained by maladaptive thoughts and beliefs. In other words, thoughts and beliefs that aren't actually appropriate for the current circumstance in which the cravings arise. So the idea is that changing thinking leads to changing in your emotions and in your behavior. That's the idea, that if you change your thoughts and your beliefs, your behavior will change. So the past is really only relevant if it kind of helps modify the current beliefs. So, you would kind of, if you wanted to compare the depth-oriented therapy to CBT or cognitive-based therapies, you'd say that cognitive-based therapies are more present-focused or top-down, like what's going on with thoughts and work there, and depth therapy is more past-focused and explanatory, like it trying to explain how it evolved. So both approaches differ, but they do share this common feature, and that is that they operate primarily at the level of mind, narrative, and cognition. So mind as in thoughts, narrative as in the story, the understanding of what those thoughts mean and right now, and cognition as in what we understand by those thoughts. That is two very different approaches. The depth-oriented therapies, looking at the past, and the cognitive-based therapies, really looking at, in a sense, the one aspect of the mind, which is the cognitive controlling factor of the mind, if you want. That's the way they look at it. And the idea is that it influences everything else. So let's now look at how consciousness-based therapy, which is a TruQuit method, and how this would differ from those two approaches. So consciousness-based therapy really kind of sits in between these models, and it operates, but it also operates on a different level entirely. The core orientation of consciousness-based therapy is that addiction is sustained by a state of disconnection, by a state of nervous system contraction, as in, for example, fight or flight, or the reward system, and disconnection in the sense of disconnection from what we really truly desire, what we really truly want, and trying to deal with the present circumstances when being disconnected from this deeper state. So it doesn't really look at faulty beliefs on their own or anything like that. It doesn't try and change faulty beliefs in order to change addictive behavior. So what consciousness-based therapy would say is that when your state of being shifts, your thoughts, your behavior, and your identity, your understanding of who and what you are, will reorganize automatically. So that's the key insight. And it's more along the lines of effortless awareness, whereas you'd have to say that cognitive-based therapy and depth-oriented therapy are very much about actively working with and trying to, in a sense, control thoughts and behaviors by understanding them generally and then bringing about a change that way. Whereas consciousness-based therapy would look at just, in a sense, effortless, open awareness, that awareness then perceiving a deeper state of what we already are, more of what's already present, more than, let's say, just thoughts and beliefs or memories of the past, or why certain emotions are occurring now, why certain thoughts are occurring now. Consciousness-based therapy would look at everything that's occurring at once and not try to change it. And yes, insights can arise. And yes, certainly past memories can arise. And insight from that does arise spontaneously. But the idea is not so much to go actively digging and excavating the past or controlling thoughts and, really interrogating our line of thinking or our beliefs or assumptions, which the cognitive-based therapies would do. It's more about allowing it all to appear while at the same time becoming aware of a deeper state of what's already present, what we already are as well. And in that deeper state, you kind of get this kind of nervous system relaxation. The fight or flight drops because an inner safety is experienced spontaneously, and an already okayness arises. So in other words, what's happening there is that any relationship with thoughts or the past, everything starts to align to the truth of this deeper state, and awareness is the key that opens up that. So integration happens through allowing and embodying awareness rather than actively interpreting or analyzing. So nothing's really analyzed or chased or resolved conceptually. That happens spontaneously. I mean, past memories arise spontaneously, and sensations, emotions, and memories, they all arise spontaneously, but nothing's analyzed. Nothing's chased, nothing's resolved. I mean, obviously you can't help thinking about it afterwards, but while it's occurring, the idea is just to be in this open, aware state. So rather than, you know, if I understand myself well enough, I will change. Rather than that, it's more something like, it's closer to something has shifted at a level of being, and the old pattern just no longer makes sense. And that's something that's realized in hindsight because it's already obsolete. So why doesn't all of that become endless? You see, because we've said it can become endless with the depth-oriented therapies. And the reason why it doesn't, this open, aware state of, experience our more natural and deeper state, it's because there's really no requirement to finish the past. There's nothing to finish. Things arise and go, come and go, including memories. There's really no checklist of memories that you need to process. There's really no fixation on a self that needs to change. In a sense, awareness is ourselves as present. And it's in this state that a kind of a softening occurs. As I said before, the whole system relaxes out of survival mode, and addiction just loses its function, because addiction's kind of there to change the present state into something more acceptable, either less painful or more pleasurable. But if you're already in this already okay state, there's nothing to fix. There's nothing to move away from. So if we were to just, create a bit of a clear, clean contrast, we could say that depth therapies, it seeks freedom through understanding of the past, and the cognitive-based therapies would seek freedom through changing the present thinking, and consciousness-based or TruQuit method would allow freedom to emerge through a shift in our state of being. So that'd be the best way that I would contrast it. So in some of my past videos, I've had comments that, yeah, it all sounds great, but it just sounds complicated and too hard to understand. And would it just go on forever? And I think that's because people are thinking that it might be related to this depth-based therapies, or it might be trying to change my thinkings or belief or the assumptions that I hold, which in a sense seems like an impossible task because they've just been there all my life and they're kind of quite automatic. I mean, obviously that can be done and CBT is very good at that. But I think in my experience with myself and many clients, that we have this access right now. We don't need to develop a skill, a special skill, other than, in a sense, opening up to what's already present. I suppose you could say that is a skill, but it's not something that you have to study for. It's something that is quite natural to our everyday experience. It's just that we often don't sit still long enough to allow our awareness to open up. We're often quite busy and quite occupied moving from one activity to another. And one of the key exercises um, with the TruQuit method, from a consciousness-based point of view, is to allow time each day to in a sense be with ourselves without any objective to achieve other than being more aware. So part of that would be, we could say, well, aren't we already just aware because we're awake and we know that we're sitting here? Well, that's true. That's one level of awareness. You can go to another level where you can be aware of awareness, aware that you're aware. So that's something that it's not hard to do. Right now, you can be aware that you're aware. For example, you can be aware of what the seat that you're sitting on. You can be aware that you're aware of that. You can be aware of where your hands are. And then you can be aware that you're aware of where your hands are. So you see the two levels? So that's not hard to understand. I mean, you've understood that in a minute. The trick is to allow yourself to become comfortable and stable in being aware of awareness. And as you allow that, this is where quite naturally, effortlessly, really, you start to, over time, become aware of deeper aspects of yourself as awareness. So that might sound a bit strange, yourself as awareness. Let me explain. So we think of ourselves as this body, as these thoughts, as this personality who lives in this place with this name and has this history. And all of that's true. That is unique to us. But every moment of every day and every day that ever there was and every day that ever there will be is experienced as present awareness. It's always present. So when we become aware of that awareness that's always present, we realize that we're not separate from that awareness. We're not separate from our awareness. So just giving you a moment for that to sink in, that we're not separate from our awareness. And then when you do stop and be still for long enough, you experience that awareness is not separate from anything. Okay? I mean, if you look around, awareness is not separate from anything you can see, anything you can hear, anything you can feel, anything you can think. And you can be aware of that. of that holistic awareness, that awareness includes all of that, all at once. And that we're not separate from that. So therefore, we're not separate from anything. So we are this very open state of being, which is just connect with that, this open state of being that is all inclusive of everything. And as soon as you become aware that all of that is connected and included within awareness, or as not separate from awareness, that is also you realize that you're way more than just an individual object, this body in this room. Of course, that's part of it. You can describe yourself as that, but you don't want to leave out the rest of it, which is all-inclusive, yourself as all-inclusive awareness and everything that is not separate from that. You're not separate from it. That's why I say we're much more a state of being than we are as an object. So it's just a matter of, what you perceive, what you become aware of. And so that's kind of understanding our physical environment, our world, but also what we are as a state of being. And largely speaking, in order to perceive that at any clear way, there needs to be some stillness. You need to give yourself time on a daily basis. So one of the questions someone asked me after they saw my previous video, the 3 states, they said, well, how? How do you do this? And I realized, even though I described it as an overview in that video, it was easily missed. And so I suppose I'm trying to describe it, how to enter this understanding in this video. So the easiest way to really summarize is to say that we need to give ourselves time to be more aware, and during that time, we don't want to be, in a sense, having an agenda to achieve anything other than becoming more open and aware of what's already present. Okay, that's how we would start, open, aware. But then we start to become aware that we're aware. So we're aware of something, let's say the computer or the body or thoughts, okay? And then we become aware that we're aware. So instead of being sort of just aware of thoughts or the computer, be conscious of that, so to speak, and know that it's there. It's another level of awareness that you're aware of it. And you start to include your awareness of awareness in your perception. In other words, you open up more to include awareness. And then you dwell there stably. And it takes some time not to be distracted away, but that's okay. And then after a while, you start to have these realizations about the things that I've been talking about. And quite naturally, a lot of things start to integrate. So thoughts and beliefs and assumptions start to align to this state of being that we experience. And also our behaviors and desires start to align to that as well. So obviously this is a much bigger topic, and it does obviously help if you have a coach or a guide helping with this. And this is what I do, really. On a weekly basis, I have conversations with groups of people, helping to clarify and helping people establish this perspective, I suppose, and this experience of themselves, and help with you know, becoming more aware of the integration that's occurring. And you'd be quite surprised that it doesn't take years. I mean, it can do for some people. I mean, there's always changes along the way, but it can also literally take months to have profound changes from being really trapped in addiction to having a really profound transformation of not only the addiction, but so many aspects of life and understanding of yourself. So I suppose if that's something that you're interested in, you can always look at the masterclass that I've linked in the description. That's a good place to start, and you can find your way from there. So anyway, I hope that clarifies why consciousness-based, or the TruQuit method of consciousness-based recovery, doesn't have to take an endless and unlimited period of time, because we're not trying to unpack all of our past, right? We're also not, you know, really trying to change our behavior from a cognitive level of understanding. So we're really looking at more awareness of our state of being in the present. And in saying all of that, I do want to reinforce that both those methods are very, very useful. And, and I've participated in both of them and got a lot of benefit. But I suppose what I stay with now is the continual deepening of awareness, because after addiction ends, you find that your emotional reactions are the next level of, in a sense, turbulence that starts to realign. And then deeper than that is, in a sense, your ability to dwell in this open state, and then all the benefits that come from that. But that's probably another topic. Anyway, I think we'll leave it there. I hope that helps. I haven't created more confusion, but anyway, in any case, I shall see you in another video, or perhaps even in person. Okay, bye for now.